Red Brick Media. High quality CDs, DVDs, lectures, khutbah, conferences and Quran recitations. All revenue generated supports our dawah work, supported by visiting our store. You can now purchase directly from our site www.redbrickmedia.co.uk.
Okay, so the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, the famous hadith concerning the fly, if it falls into a drink or a vessel or a utensil or something, then what you do is you immerse it and you throw it away, and then the drink is still pure. You're allowed to drink it. And again, we said that this was a type of exception to the previous rule, in the sense that it is an exception to show that even though this is something which has landed inside, it is pure. It is pure, and even if something changes, meaning one of the attributes of the water, it is still pure water because of the purity of this fly. And we said along with that, anything which takes the ruling of the fly. So what's the ruling of the fly? What's the common denominator we look for? So when I say other creatures or flies or insects that resemble a fly, what are we looking for? Anything which doesn't have blood, which doesn't have flowing blood in it. And so we said, for example, if you were to squash a mosquito or something, flowing blood wouldn't come out in the same way where if you were to sacrifice a sheep or something, blood would flow. And so this is the common denominator. This is what we look for. And in Arabic it's known as ma la dama sa'il lahu, something which doesn't have flowing blood. If something doesn't have flowing blood, it takes the same ruling as the fly. So a mosquito, a bee, a wasp, these kind of creatures, small little insect creatures that don't have flowing blood, they would take the same ruling. The next hadith was the hadith of, seems like there's only like 2 or 3 people that answer every time. The hadith of Abu Waqid al-Laythi, which is what? Anyone? Sorry? Then complete it. Whatever portion is cut off from an animal is considered to be dead, even if the animal continues to live. So we said basically we have a general ruling in Islam. If something dies naturally, what is the ruling of the animal? Is it halal or haram to consume? So we said that if an animal dies naturally, it falls under 2 types. One is a general animal, general creature, general animal, and the ruling is that it is haram. That's the general ruling. And the other is fish, or the living of the sea, or the dead of the sea, rather, and the ocean. Then they have a separate ruling, as is mentioned in the first hadith in Bulugh al-Maram, and that is that they are pure. So now this hadith speaks about a part of this, like just a small aspect or an angle of this issue. And that is what happens if someone comes and he cuts off a limb from this animal. So for example, it's a sheep. You go and you cut off a leg of the sheep. Now the sheep can still survive on 3 legs. You may not have a very pleasant life after that. And we said that it's not really concerning whether it's halal, whether it's allowed for you to do such a thing or not, and the pain that it causes to the animal. Keep that issue aside. And inshallah we'll come on to that in the relevant chapter when it comes to the etiquettes of slaughtering and so on, and animal rights and so on in Islam. But the point is here that if it were to happen, so someone takes off the leg of a sheep and the animal is still alive, what is the ruling of that piece of meat that you have now? That limb that you have taken off. Now generally a sheep is a halal animal, it's a pure animal. If it was to be sacrificed in an Islamic way, then it is halal, it is pure, it is allowed for us to eat. But the exception here is what? The animal is still alive, it hasn't been slaughtered. So the limb that's been taken off, what ruling does it take? Does it take the ruling of the animal were it to be slaughtered? Or does it take the ruling of the animal if it was to die unslaughtered, of natural causes? And so what this hadith shows is that it takes which ruling? The second. And that is that if an animal was to die of natural causes, it would be impure. So likewise in this instance, that limb that we've taken off, that piece of meat is impure, because it's taken the ruling of an animal which has died of natural causes. That animal is still alive and it is still breathing. And so it is considered dead carrion meat. This is in opposition or in contradiction to the fish. For example, if, you could cut off, the leg of a lobster, or you could, cut off something from a crab, or some part of a fish, and the animal or the creature still lives. What is the ruling? It is halal. Why? Because the general ruling of dead fish is that it is halal. And so basically that is what this hadith speaks about. Okay, the next hadith, the fourth hadith that we took last week. Which hadith? The hadith of Hudhayfa radiallahu an, which is? Sorry? The prohibition of eating from gold and silver utensils. So now we obviously came into the chapter of utensils and vessels, Babul Aniya. And we said that generally the ruling is in utensils and vessels that they are all allowed. Can you use any utensil, any vessel, irrespective of what it is made of. And the reason for this, or the proof for this, is the verse in the Quran. Can anyone remind us? Which verse in the Quran shows this? Everyone forgot to write the verse. It's the most important part. Tells you everything is allowed. The hadith, the verse of the Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ لَكُم مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. It is Allah that has made everything, created everything in the earth for you. Allah created everything in the earth for you, meaning for you to use. It's halal for you, it's pure for you to use. And this is an important issue here, right? When you're taking notes and you're studying different chapters, never forget to write the asl of a chapter, the basis of a chapter, the general rule of thumb. There's no point writing all of the exceptions if you don't even know what they're the exception from. You don't know what the basic ruling of the chapter is, but you're writing down every exception that comes across that chapter. And so it's important to always get down the basic rulings. And so the basic ruling of utensils and vessels is that they're allowed, irrespective of what they're made of. They're made of wood, they're made of some leather, they're made of, for example, metal, some kind of metal. They are allowed. That is the general ruling. However, now this hadith shows that there are exceptions to this. And so this chapter is talking about exceptions to that ruling and putting different restrictions on that ruling and specifying different generalities concerning utensils and vessels. And so the first thing that we learn from this hadith of Hudhayfa radiallahu an is that the first exception to this rule is gold and silver. Gold and silver. So generally everything is allowed, but now we have an exception to this rule from this hadith. And again, it shows the importance of taking knowledge completely, taking knowledge as a whole. Not just simply studying one verse of the Quran or one hadith and not studying the chapter in its entirety. And so, gold and silver are disallowed. They are not allowed, they are prohibited. And this also is shown in the following hadith of Salama radiallahu anha, when she speaks about the punishment, or when the Prophet ﷺ speaks about the punishment for someone who uses silver utensils. So these are the hadith that we took last week. Moving on to hadith number 16. قال الإمام الحافظ المصنف رحمه الله تعالى وعن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا دبغ الإهاب فقد طهر أخرجه مسلم وعند الأربعة أيما إهاب دبغ. On the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas رضي الله عنهما, who said that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, any skin of an animal which is tanned, then it is pure. And this is collected by Imam Muslim. And in the 4 books of the Sunnah, in Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i and Ibn Majah, the wording of the hadith is whichever skin of an animal is tanned. This is the 16th hadith mentioned by Imam Ibn Hajar rahimahullah in Bulugh al-Maram. And we're going to take hadith 16, 17 and 18 together. 16, 17 and 18 together, because all of them really deal with the same chapter and the same issue, and they deal with it from just very slightly different perspectives. So hadith number 17 is وعن سلمة ابن المحبق رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم دباغ جلود الميتة طهورها صححه ابن حبان. On the authority of Salama ibn al-Muhabbiq radiyallahu anhu, who said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, tanning the skin of a dead animal is purification. Is purification, and this hadith is authenticated by Ibn Hibban. And hadith number 18, وعن ميمونة رضي الله عنها قالت مر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بشاة يجرونها فقال لو أخذتم إهابها فقالوا إنها ميتة فقال يطهرها الماء والقرض أخرجه أبو داود والنسائي. The hadith of Maymuna radiallahu anha, who said that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam passed by a group of people who were dragging a sheep. So he said to them, why don't you take its skin, benefit from its skin? So they said it's dead meat, meaning it's carrion, it wasn't slaughtered. So the Prophet ﷺ said to them, indeed it is purified with water and with a certain type of plant, inshallah, which we'll come and explain later on. It is purified by water and this type of plant known as al-qarad. And this is authentic, and this is collected by Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i. These three hadith, 16, 17 and 18, now speak about a type of utensil and vessel that especially in the olden days was very popular. And obviously in those times, in the times of the Prophet ﷺ, the people obviously didn't have brass, they didn't have copper, they didn't have metal, they didn't have the ability to forge these metals and make them into utensils and pots. So the vast majority of what they used would either be wooden or something out of mud or clay, or it would be something which is made out of leather, something which you take from the skin of an animal and you use it. And so this is something which was common during that time. So the issue here now is, what is the ruling of the skin of an animal? The skin of an animal. And especially if that skin of the animal comes from an animal which hasn't been slaughtered. So it's an animal which you found that is dead. It hasn't been slaughtered. You can't eat it, it's haram. But can you now benefit from its skin? Or is the whole animal haram? You can't benefit from it in any way. Or for example, you find a dead animal which is haram generally. Meaning it's not like a sheep or a camel which has died of its own accord or died naturally, but rather it's an animal, for example, like like a crocodile, right? That's very popular. Or an elephant or a tiger or a lion. Can you use the skin? It's obviously haram as an animal to consume. You can't eat it. But can you benefit from this part of its body? Not to eat, not to drink, but simply to use it as a container. And the reason why it's mentioned here by the scholar rahimahullah, by Ibn Hajar, and why he mentions three hadith concerning it, is because again it has a connection to the purity of what you hold in that vessel or in that pouch or in that utensil. So if we say that water is pure, but it's now held in an impure vessel, something which is not allowed for us to use, doesn't that then affect the purity of that substance, of that liquid? Won't it affect the purity of that water? And so basically why Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is mentioning these ahadith here is to discuss this issue. And even though many of us probably don't use leather pouches anymore for water, but you see it like in some places, it's not commonly used now, but it is still a ruling because it affects something which is even wider than utensils. Can you use it, for example, in clothing or in shoes or as a rug or as a mat or in any way, shape or form? The ruling is the same. It still comes back to the same issue. And that is whether you can use the skin of an animal, irrespective of whether it is halal or haram, and irrespective of whether you have slaughtered it or it has not been slaughtered. It is dead meat. And so the first hadith, the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhuma, speaks about it in a very general term. And that is that he says, إِذَا دُبِغَ الْإِهَابِ. The word ihab in the Arabic language refers to the skin of an animal. Ihab in the Arabic language is the skin of an animal. And so especially in those days, what the people used to do is that they would benefit from the animal in totality. They would benefit from the hair of the animal, the skin of the animal, and the meat of the animal. So they wouldn't just throw away things, because obviously people were poor and they needed this stuff. And if you study even, for example, the history of the Americans and the American Indians, for example, even they would do this. When they slaughtered their animals or when they killed their animals, they would benefit from all of the animal. They wouldn't just start throwing things away, they did everything. And so they would benefit from the hair, they would benefit from the skin, they would benefit from the meat, they would benefit from the hooves or from the horns or whatever different parts of the animal that they had. And so likewise, people before Islam or in Islam, at the beginning of Islam in pre-Arabian times, they would also benefit from the animal. And they would use it in different ways and in different contexts. And so this issue is concerning the skin of an animal. The word dubigh or dibagh is to tan something. To tan something. And basically what it means is to, in some kind of chemical way or in some way or another, to remove all of the moisture of that skin. All of the moisture on that skin, so that it becomes something which can be used as a container, something which can be used for other purposes. And so the purpose of tanning is twofold. Number one, it is to soften. It is to soften that skin. So some skin of some animals is very tough and it's very hard. And so it softens that skin. And number two, it removes the moisture from that skin so that it can be used as what you want it to be used for. So this is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas. In the hadith number 17, which is basically a slight variation of the previous hadith, the hadith of Salama ibn al-Muhabbiq, who was a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there isn't much in his biography, but it is said that he went to live in Basra after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he had a son by the name of Sinan, who was also a companion. And this hadith, the hadith of Salama, hadith number 17, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions that it's authenticated by Ibn Hibban, but he doesn't mention where you can find it. He doesn't mention who collects it. But it's collected by Imam Ahmad and Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i and also by Ibn Hibban, and it's authenticated by also by Ad-Daraqutni and Imam An-Nawawi and Ibn Hajar rahimahullah himself. In this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is speaking about a different aspect of the same issue. So still about tanning the skin of an animal. But this time the Prophet ﷺ speaks about an animal which is dead. So the first hadith, the hadith of Ibn Abbas, is general. The Prophet ﷺ doesn't speak about whether the animal is dead or whether it is slaughtered or unslaughtered. Nor does he mention whether the animal is pure or impure, meaning halal to consume or haram to consume. However, in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ adds the word juludul mayta, the skin of dead animals. But he still doesn't mention what type of a dead animal. Is it pure or impure? Meaning, is it halal animal to eat or haram? But he does mention that even if it's a dead animal, meaning that you find that the animal wasn't slaughtered properly. You come across a cow and it's dead. It wasn't slaughtered. It's not a halal for you to consume. But can you still use its skin? This is what the hadith is talking about. Can you still benefit from the skin? And by the way, benefiting from the skin, irrespective of where the animal is and what condition it is only allowed after it is tanned. So it has to undergo this process. You can't just take the skin and benefit from it. And that's why in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, it is tuhuruha. The way that you purify the skin is in this way. So it has to undergo this process. If it doesn't undergo this process, then it is not al-halal for you to consume. It is not allowed for you to benefit or to use that skin, irrespective of even if the animal was slaughtered and it's halal. So you slaughter a sheep and then you take the skin and it's a halal pure animal, but you don't tan the skin, it is still impure for you to use. And so it must be tanned. And then hadith number 18, the hadith of Maymuna radiallahu anha, speaks again about a slightly different version of this hadith, or slightly different version of the previous two events, but it has one connecting principle, and that is that it again speaks about animals which are dead. So in the hadith of Maymuna, the Prophet ﷺ passes by a group of people who found a sheep which is dead, and so they were just disposing of it. So the Prophet ﷺ said to them, why don't you at least benefit from its skin? So they said, O Messenger of Allah, it is dead. Meaning that it's not been slaughtered. Even though it's a sheep, it's halal, but because it hasn't been slaughtered, it is now haram for us to consume. And so they understood, the companions generally, that if it hasn't been slaughtered, you can't use any part of its body. You can't use the hair, you can't use the skin, you can't use the meat, and so on. And so the Prophet ﷺ is saying, no, use the skin. They said, O Messenger of Allah, it's a dead animal. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you tan it, it is pure. And how do you tan it? With water and something known as al-qarad. Al-qarad in the English language is translated as mimosa. Mimosa is a type of plant or a type of flower. Mimosa, M-I-M-O-S-A, mimosa. And it's basically a type of plant, and there's many different species of this plant, or very many different varieties of this plant. But basically it's something which purifies the skin. And so the scholars say anything which purifies or helps accelerate this process, you're allowed to use. So for example, some scholars say that what can also be used is the skin of a pomegranate. The skin of pomegranate can also be used in tanning, and it also helps in the tanning process. And there are other things which a person can use as well. But the point is that whatever you use, it has to be tanned. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, yes, the animal is dead, meaning it's not slaughtered, it's haram. But you can use the skin so long as it is tanned, and so long as you purify it. So basically these three hadith show us a number of things. Number one, that any skin which is tanned becomes pure. Any skin which is tanned becomes pure. And we'll come into the difference of opinion concerning this after a short while. But basically the skin of any animal which is tanned becomes pure. Number two, the hadith of Salama Hadith number 17 shows that even if it's dead meat, it can be purified. Even if it's carrion meat, even if the animal died without being slaughtered, it died of natural causes or however it died, it can still be used. The skin can still be used so long as it is purified in this way, meaning it is tanned. Number 3, the hadith of Maymuna speaks about sheep. It speaks about sheep in particular and the skin of the sheep, and inshallah we'll mention why the author rahimahullah has mentioned all these 3 hadith. And again, it's something which you notice even in the previous hadith that we've studied. Sometimes he'll mention 3 different hadith where he could have just mentioned 1. So if he was to mention the hadith of Maymuna, which is probably the most in detail and most explicit of the 3 narrations that he brings, it would have sufficed in a way. We would have still got the same benefits and the same rulings. But he mentions the 3 hadith to show you that there is a difference of opinion. And that difference of opinion that we'll come on to in a short while basically reflects a stand that the scholars take based on each one of these hadith. There are 3 different opinions in this issue. Each one of the scholars is taking basically one of those types of hadith. And so that's basically why he mentions all 3 instead of sufficing with 1. The 4th benefit is that once skin is tanned and purified, it is permissible to use. It is permissible to use, and that is general use. Whether it's for a vessel, whether it's for a pouch, whether it's for example a rug, whether it's for example a blanket, whatever you want to use it for, some type of clothing, whatever it is allowed generally, it is permissible in every which way. Number 5, if it is therefore pure, then by extension it is allowed for you to buy and sell. So anything which is pure in Islam, you're allowed to trade in. So if it's something which is pure, you can trade in it. So likewise, the skin, once it's been purified, you can now buy and sell it. You can now buy and sell it. And number 6, it is allowed to tan skin with anything which will help or speed up the process, such as what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, this mimosa leaf or the pomegranate skin or anything like this. These are the benefits of this hadith. We now come to the issue where the scholars of Islam have differed, rahimahumullah. And one of the things that I want to point out before we go into the actual issue is that you see how the scholars of Islam, rahimahumullah, when they differ over certain issues, they differ based upon evidence. And one of the most common misconceptions that scholars have about madhabs, that people have about madhabs and about scholars and about jurists, is that they differ for no reason, or they differ just for the sake of differing, or they differ because their desires want them to differ, or something like this. Whereas in reality, if you were to study the books of the scholars of fiqh, the books of the likes of the students of Imam Abu Hanif and Shafi'i and others, rahimahumullah, find that they differ based upon evidence. Yes, sometimes they're incorrect. The evidence is weak, or the hadith is weak, or their logic is faulty, or they've made mistakes, or they've missed something which they didn't hear, or they didn't come to them, or for whatever reason, their opinion is incorrect. But irrespective of that issue, it is important to know that they always differ based upon evidence. Never will you find the scholars, and we don't think this way of our scholars, of the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik and Shafi'i and Ahmad and the other great scholars of the Salaf, that they would just simply differ for the sake of differing, or simply because they're trying to score points, or simply because they want a larger following, or simply because some people would prefer it to be this way. Scholars of Islam have greater standing and have greater piety of Allah and have greater fear of Allah than simply to differ over these trivial issues. But if they feel that this is the correct issue and the evidence that they have that is presented to them, they feel that this is the correct opinion and stance to take, then they will take that opinion. And this is known as amana ilmiya. This is the trust that Allah gives them. Even if people don't like that issue, they don't like that opinion, other people want a different opinion, that's irrespective of the issue. But they will differ based upon adillah, based upon what they consider to be the strongest proofs from the Quran and the Sunnah. And this is something which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in that famous hadith concerning the scholar who utilizes their ijtihad. They expend their best efforts, they do everything that they can possibly do. And then some of them are correct and some of them are mistaken. And this is human nature. You can never always be right and you will never always be wrong. And so this person comes, this scholar, and they use their ijtihad, they expend all of their efforts, they use everything that they can, and then they arrive at a solution, or they arrive at a fatwa, at a ruling. If it is correct, they have 2 rewards. But if it is incorrect, they still have 1 reward. As the Prophet ﷺ said, And so in this issue that we have here, again, there is a difference of opinion. And that difference of opinion is based on understanding the texts. And it's not just the 3 hadith that we've mentioned in this lesson, or the 3 hadith that Ibn Hajar mentions. But there are over 14 or 15 ahadith just on this one issue that you will find spread out through the books of hadith. Just the issue of using the skin of animals and tanning it. What is the ruling? Can you use it or not? There are 15 different narrations, some authentic, some weak, and so on. But the point is that there are many narrations, not just the ones that you find in this book. And so the scholars have differed basically after they have considered all of these different texts and different evidences. So what is the difference of opinion? The difference of opinion comes back to using the skin of an animal, whether it is tanned or not tanned, irrespective of that issue. Can you use the skin of an animal? Can you use the skin of an animal? And this is a difference of opinion that occurred even amongst the time of the companions radiyallahu anhum. Even amongst the times of the companions radiyallahu anhum, they differed over this issue. Some of the scholars said that if you tan the skin of an animal, it is pure, irrespective of whether the animal was slaughtered or not, and irrespective of whether the animal is pure or not. So these scholars say that any animal which is tanned, the skin of any animal which is tanned, it is pure and allowed for you to use. It doesn't matter whether you slaughtered the animal or not. So whether it is halal for you to consume or haram for you to consume. And it doesn't matter whether the animal in its original state, even when it's alive, is halal or haram. So these scholars would say that crocodile, which is haram for you to eat, it is allowed for you to use its skin. Likewise, a tiger or a leopard or a lion or a cheetah, these animals which are haram for us to eat, it is allowed for you to use the skin of the animal so long as you undergo this process of tanning. I was coming on to that. Don't jump the gun. Be patient. Okay. With the exception of 2 animals, the dog and the pig. And that exception is based upon what we discussed previously in the chapter of water and the different narration concerning the impurity of these 2 animals. But any other animal it is allowed. And this is the opinion of many scholars, and it is the opinion of some of the companions radiyallahu anhum as well, the likes of I think it was Ali radiyallahu anhu and Abdullah bin Mas'ud and others. Others from the companions held this opinion. And they base this upon the hadith of Ibn Abbas, the first hadith that we mentioned, which is general, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, any animal skin which is tanned, it is pure. Any animal. And the wording in the books of the Sunnah, the second wording that Ibn Hajar mentions, the one that you find in Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i and At-Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, it says ayyuma. And ayyuma in the Arabic language means whatever, whichever. It is a general encompassing statement which includes everything. The narration of Sahih Muslim says either, if the skin of an animal is tanned, then it is pure. But the other wording of the same hadith that you find in the books of Sunnah, which is also authentic, says ayyuma, whichever. And so it's general and it's encompassing. And so they base this on this hadith. They base it upon the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma. The second opinion that some scholars took was that it is impermissible. Impermissible, completely the opposite of the first opinion, irrespective of whether the animal is slaughtered or not, and irrespective of whether the animal is halal or not. They said that you can never benefit from the skin of an animal. Doesn't matter. Even if it's a halal animal like a sheep and you slaughtered it, it's halal for you to eat the meat, but you can't use the skin even if you tan it. Even if you tan it. And this was the opinion of some of the companions like Umar and his son Abdullah ibn Umar and Aisha radiyallahu anil jami'. They held this opinion. They held this opinion. Now you may say, or you may ask, that the hadith that we've mentioned so far all speak about the permissibility. The 3 hadith that we've mentioned, that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions in this book, speak about the permissibility. Why then have these scholars gone to the opposite opinion? And they've gone to it in the extreme, meaning nothing's allowed. Nothing at all. It doesn't matter how if you tan it, you don't tan it, if it's halal, if it's haram, if you slaughter, if you don't slaughter. But basically these scholars use a narration on the authority of Abdullah ibn Ukaym. On the authority of Abdullah ibn Ukaym, who was one of the tabi'een. who narrates from the Prophet ﷺ that he wrote a book, or he wrote a letter, towards the end of his life. And he sent it to the different places where the Muslims had dispersed, to the different lands of the Muslims. And in that letter, it said that don't use the skin of an animal. Generally, don't use the skin of an animal. And so these scholars say that this narration, it abrogates all of these previous narrations. The hadith of Ibn Abbas, and the hadith of Maymuna, and the hadith of Salama, and the other different narrations that you find. Because this was something done at the end of the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and it clearly says don't use the skin of an animal. Whether it's tanned or not tanned, slaughtered, not slaughtered, halal, haram, it doesn't matter. This is their opinion. However, when you look at this narration, you find that it is a weak narration. And it has a number of weaknesses, and Imam al-Baghawi and other scholars have mentioned the reasons why it is weak. But one of those reasons is because the person who narrated it never met the Prophet ﷺ. It is mursal. He never met the Prophet ﷺ, and that in itself is a weakness. But there are other weaknesses as well. But this is the second opinion. Those scholars held that hadith is authentic. And by the way, some scholars said that the hadith was authentic, like Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad said that the hadith, even though it's mursal, it is authentic. And he said that its isnad is jayyid. And so those scholars took the hadith to be authentic, and so they held that opinion. The third opinion on this issue strikes the middle path. And they say that the skin of an animal is halal if it is tanned, so long as that animal was halal to consume and it was slaughtered. So they say, for example, you can't use crocodile skin or lion skin. Doesn't matter. But you can use a sheep skin if that sheep was slaughtered, or cow skin if it was slaughtered, or goat skin if it was slaughtered, or skin if it was slaughtered. However, even if the camel wasn't slaughtered, or the cow or the sheep or the goat weren't slaughtered, then you can't even use their skin. So these scholars basically go down the middle path of the two other opinions. Basically they're saying that yes, you can use it, but you can't use it just for anything. It has to be a halal animal, a pure animal, and it must be one that is slaughtered. So this is the difference of opinion. And these scholars of the third opinion, they base it upon the hadith of Maymuna, where the Prophet ﷺ is specifically speaking about an animal which is pure. An animal which is pure, even though the hadith speaks about an animal which hasn't been slaughtered. But they have other narrations where they mention that it is only to be from a slaughtered animal. But they mention these opinions. So these are the three opinions on this issue. And what seems to be strong, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, is the first opinion, that it is allowed generally and that there is no restriction. It's definitely not impermissible because the hadith that they use of Abdullah ibn Uqaym is weak. It is weak. And as for the issue of whether it should be slaughtered or not, then this also goes in contravention to the hadith of Ibn Abbas, and to the hadith of Salama, and to the hadith of Maymuna. And so generally it is allowed. So if a person was to benefit from lion skin or from crocodile skin or any way, for whatever it is, then it is allowed. It is pure so long as that skin is tanned, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Hadith number 19. وَنَبِي ثَعْلَبَةَ الْخُشَنِي رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ قال قلت يا رسول الله إنا بأرض قوم أهل كتاب أفنأكل في آنيتهم فقال لا تأكلوا فيها إلا ألا تجدوا غيرها فاغسلوها وكلوا فيها متفق عليه. On the authority of Abu Tha'lab al-Khushani radiyallahu anhu, who said that I said to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, O Messenger of Allah, we live in the land of the people of the book, meaning the Jews and the Christians. Can we eat from their vessels? Can we eat from their utensils? So he said, no, do not eat from them, except if you can find nothing else, then wash it and eat from it. Wash the utensils and then use them to eat and drink from. And this is in al-Bukhari and Muslim. This hadith also speaks about utensils and vessels, and it brings obviously another ruling concerning this. And this is now whether it is allowed to use the utensils and the vessels of non-Muslims. This hadith specifically speaks about Jews and Christians, but there will be other hadith that speak about non-Muslims in general, disbelievers in general, even if they are Jews or Christians. This hadith is narrated by Abu Tha'lab al-Khushani, whose name was Jurhum ibn Nashib. Jurhum ibn Nashib. And he was one of the companions that attended the Bay'atul Ridwan, which was the bay'ah or the pledge of allegiance that the Prophet ﷺ, that the companions gave to the Prophet ﷺ under the tree during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And then he attended many battles that came after this as well. And he died in the year 75 Hijri in Asham. He died in the year 75 Hijri in Asham. Abu Tha'lab al-Khushani came from a land where the people there lived with the Jews and the Christians. They had Jews and Christians in their land, and they interacted with them and they lived with them. And so he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he asked him this question: O Messenger of Allah, we live with the Jews and Christians, can we use their utensils? Can we use their vessels? And so the Prophet ﷺ said, no, do not use them unless you can't find anything else, in which case wash them first and then use them. Now the scholars of Islam rahimahumullah, when taking this hadith, obviously again you can't just take this hadith in isolation, but you must take all of the other narrations as well that are mentioned by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They found that in other ahadith it is authentically reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went and he ate from the non-Muslims using their vessels. So if he would go, for example, to someone's house, he would eat from their vessels. And even when the Prophet ﷺ was poisoned by the Jewish woman, he ate from her food. He was using their vessels as well. And in another narration, the Prophet ﷺ ate from a Jewish boy. He ate from the food that he gave him in a pot or in a vessel or in a container. And so the Prophet ﷺ would eat from them. So how is this hadith to be understood? Scholars said that this hadith is to be understood when you go to take their vessels for yourself, meaning that you borrow them, or you buy them, or you want to use them. And so you take them into your own ownership. This is what the hadith is talking about. Not if you go and eat with them in their house, and they present food for you, for example, on a plate. You don't say to them, no, take the food off, go wash the dish, bring it back, and then put the food on again. This isn't what the hadith is speaking about. The hadith is speaking about whether you can borrow their utensils, whether you can buy their utensils, whether you can, for example, use their utensils for a long purpose. Or for example, something like this. It's not just when you go and visit them, but rather you want to take the vessels or utensils into your own possession, whether it's on a borrowed basis or whether it's on a permanent basis. And so the Prophet ﷺ is saying, no, don't do so. It is better not to do so. Because you don't know, for example, if they used it for pork or for alcohol or for something else. So don't do so. Unless you have no other choice. If there is no other choice, there's no one there that can make that, no Muslims making utensils and vessels. And obviously in the olden days, people used to make them with their own hand. There weren't stores and shops that you had. It was just simply people making them. People that used to make these containers and pots with their own hands. So the Prophet ﷺ said, no, don't do so. Or don't borrow them, or don't take them, or don't buy them unless you can't find anything else. In which case it is allowed so long as you wash it first. And so this hadith shows, and there is a different narration of this hadith as well, in which the Prophet ﷺ was asked by Abu Tha'laba. He said, O Messenger of Allah, we live with the Jews and the Christians, and they use their utensils and their pots and their containers to cook pork, and they use their cups and their vessels to drink alcohol. Can we benefit from their utensils and their vessels? And the Prophet ﷺ gave the same reply. He said, no, unless you can't find anything else, in which case you wash it and then you eat and drink from it. And so it shows that, for example, pork and alcohol, these things are impure. But it also shows that if you wash those utensils, then the impurity is removed. And so just to reiterate, this hadith is speaking about not you going to a restaurant, or not you going to a friend's house, or someone that is a non-Muslim. Or for example, if you're a new Muslim and you go back to your parents' house, right? And they give you some food and you say, no, wash the dishes first. This isn't what we're talking about. It's when you take them into your own possession. You take them into your own possession, now you should wash them. Whereas otherwise you can go and you can eat and you can take from their vessels. And this is shown from the other hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which the Prophet ﷺ would do so. And there are many authentic narrations of this nature. So the benefits of this hadith, number one, is that the general rule is that we don't take the vessels and the utensils of the non-Muslims, if avoidable. We don't take the utensils of the people of the book and the non-Muslims. Number two, but if one must take them and one must use them, then they should be washed first. So you wash them first, and you don't have to wash them 7 times or with dirt or anything like this. You just wash them once, even if it is simply with water. Even if they are rinsed with water, that is sufficient. And so that is how you make them pure for you to use. Number 3, the third benefit is it shows the permissibility of dealing with the disbelievers, interacting with them. And the next hadith will also show this. And so our religion is not one of extremes. It is allowed for you to go and use the utensils of the non-Muslims, to interact with them, to buy and sell with them, to borrow from them, to eat from them, and so on. And this is shown in many ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. That Allah does not prohibit you, He doesn't prevent you from those people who didn't kill you or fight you, nor those people who drove you out of your land. If they are not from these people, then there is no harm in you being good towards them and being just towards them. And indeed Allah loves those who are just. And so the Prophet ﷺ would often interact with the non-Muslims, and he would borrow from them, and he would take loans from them, and he had a debt from them. As is mentioned in other hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet ﷺ would borrow from the Jews, and he would be indebted towards them, and so on. And so it's allowed to interact with them, as this hadith also shows. The fourth benefit is the beauty of the Sharia and its ease. So the Prophet ﷺ could have said, don't use their vessels, make your own. But this would have been difficult for a lot of people, to make your own pots and utensils. And even now, in our day, for every single Muslim to go and to make their own pots and utensils and containers. And so the Sharia has come with ease, and it has made things easy for people, and it facilitates ease so long as it doesn't contradict the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also we see that this is irrespective of what they used it for. So if they used their vessels or the containers before you had them, for pork or for alcohol, for whatever else they use them, it's not our job firstly to take an inquisition of them, right? So you don't strap them up and you don't ask them 20 questions about what they use them for. Doesn't matter. This hadith shows the permissibility, because in the other narration in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ is explicitly asked concerning them using it for pork and alcohol, and he still gave the same ruling. So it's the same hadith, but it has two narrations. And so the Prophet ﷺ allowed it. So irrespective of what they used it for, irrespective of how they kept it, so long as you wash it, then it is allowed and it is permissible for you to use, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Hadith number 20. وعن عمران بن حسين رضي الله عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأصحابه توضأوا من مزدات امرأة مشركة متفق عليه في حديث طويل. The hadith of Imran ibn Hussein radiallahu anhuma, that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam and his companions made wudu from a water bag that belonged to a non-Muslim woman, to a pagan disbelieving woman. And this hadith is in al-Bukhari and Muslim, and Ibn Hajar says it's a portion of a very long hadith. It is a portion of a very long hadith. Imran ibn Hussein radiallahu anhuma is a famous companion of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he was from the tribe of al-Khuza'a, and his kunya was Abu Nujayd. And he became Muslim in the year of Khaybar, in the 6th year of the Hijrah, and it is said he and Abu Hurairah radiallahu an accepted Islam around the same time. He and Abu Hurairah radiallahu an accepted Islam at the same time. And he became a scholar from amongst the companions. And after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, Umar radiallahu an sent him to Basra, where he became a judge, and he lived there until he died in the 52nd or 53rd year of the Hijrah. And there are many narrations of the scholars speaking about Imran ibn Hussein radiallahu anhuma and them praising him. One of them is that they said that no companion came to Basra better than him radiallahu anhuma. So he was a great companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn Hajar says that there is a long hadith which he has just summarized, and this is something which he does from time to time. Instead of going through the whole story or the whole long narration of the hadith, he just picks the point or the portion that is relevant, and he doesn't mention the rest. But we will mention in abridged form. Basically, this hadith refers to the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet ﷺ being on a journey. And they were on a journey and they ran out of water. They were in the desert and they ran out of water. So the Prophet ﷺ sent two companions to go and search for water. So as they were searching for water, they came across this disbelieving woman, this pagan woman, a non-Muslim woman. And so she was carrying with her two water bags, right? Two water bags. She had two big bags and containers of water. leather pouches of water that she was carrying, and she was on her own. And so the companion said to her, where did you get this water from? We're looking for water, where did you get this water from? She replied, it was a day and a night ago, meaning over a day's travel, meaning I got this yesterday. It took me a day. It's been a day since I took this water and I've carried on walking, meaning it's a very far distance away. It's not nowhere near. It's been a day's travel since I got this water. And so the companions knew that there's nothing nearby, but now they have some water. And so they said to her, will you come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with us? Will you come with us to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? She said, do you mean the one who is a sabit? A sabit in the Arabic language is someone who rebels against his people. He comes with a religion other than the religion that they are on. So he comes with something new that the people don't know. So she had heard, even though she was a non-Muslim, she had heard of what took place in Mecca, what the companions and the Prophet ﷺ were upon, this new religion. So she said, do you mean this man that came with the new religion? And because it was a derogatory term, the companions refused to use it. But they said to her, yes, it is the one that you're speaking about. They just said in general terms, yes, that is the same individual. Will you come with us? So she went with them and they came to the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ asked for her permission to take one of these pouches or one of these water bags and to use it for his companions. And so she agreed. And so the Prophet ﷺ opened it and he blew in it, and then the companions benefited from the water. They made wudu and they drank from it and they benefited from it. And then after he finished, he ordered that she be given some food. So she was given dates and meat and so on. And this is the Prophet ﷺ and his beautiful character. Even though she didn't ask for anything in return, the Prophet ﷺ would not receive something except that he would pay someone back. He would do good towards them in return. And often he would do more than that. And so he gave her this food. And then he gave her the water pouch back. And the companion said that none of the water had decreased. Meaning that this was a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ. That all of the companions benefited from the water. They drank and they used it and they made wudu from it. But still the water was there, the same level of water. And not only that, but the Prophet ﷺ gave her extra food as well. And then she left. So this is the hadith of Imran ibn Hussein. And the hadith is much longer than what I've mentioned, but that is the abridged version. This hadith basically shows the permissibility of using something which belongs to a non-Muslim. Using something which belongs to a non-Muslim, so long as that it is something which doesn't contradict our own Sharia. So long as it's not something which has been made haram. So for example, if it was something which was like, for example, a silver utensil or a gold utensil, we wouldn't use it. Not because their possessing it makes it impure, but because in our religion it is impure anyway. It is haram to use. However, anything else, it is the same, whether it belongs to a Muslim or a non-Muslim. So this water bag, it was made out of leather, it was tan leather, it is pure. Just because it belonged to a non-Muslim doesn't mean that it's not pure. And so the Prophet ﷺ didn't ask her to wash the bag and then put the water in. He didn't say anything like this. But he benefited from it the way that it was. And so like I said in the previous hadith, that we're not speaking in the hadith of Abu Tha'laba, we're not speaking about when someone gives you something. But rather it's when you take that container into your own possession. Because in this hadith, the companions drank from the water. But the Prophet ﷺ said, no, don't drink from it, wash it first and then drink from it. Because that's what the previous hadith says. But it shows here that those are circumstances which are particular to that hadith. And those circumstances are that you take it into your own possession, you borrow it, you buy it and so on. If you are just using it from them, they give it to you, you go to them as a guest, or you go to them like in this instance where the Prophet ﷺ is just benefiting from that water, then it is not a condition that it has to be washed or cleansed. But rather you can take from it as is. So the benefits of this hadith, firstly, is how the Prophet ﷺ used again something which is tanned, skin which is tanned. Number two, how the Prophet ﷺ would benefit from the non-Muslims as well. He would interact with them. Number three, it shows the permissibility of using the dead animal skin. So again, the issue we came to where the scholars have differed, this woman was a non-Muslim. And so that skin, or that tanned skin, it must have belonged to an animal. And the animal wouldn't have been slaughtered. according to Islam, because she's a non-Muslim. She wouldn't have slaughtered it according to the rules of Islam. But because it was tanned, the Prophet ﷺ used that skin of water. He used that water pouch, and he didn't say that it was impure, but rather he gave it the ruling of purity, and that's because as soon as it is tanned, then it becomes pure. Hadith number 20, hadith that we'll take today, and the last hadith of this chapter. وعن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أن قدح النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم انكسر فاتخذ مكان الشعب سلسلة من فضة أخرجه البخاري. On the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas on the authority of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu an, that the vessel or the container or the cup of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam broke, or a part of it broke. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam placed some silver in there to repair it. He placed some silver in there, and this is collected by Imam al-Bukhari. In the previous hadith that we spoke about, in the hadith of Hudhayfa radiallahu an last week, we spoke about the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in which there is a prohibition to use anything made from silver or gold. And we said that gold or silver, irrespective of whether it is solid, pure gold, meaning there is nothing else except gold or silver, or whether it is a mixture of the two, or whether it is mixed with something else, or whether it is just done for purification, all of these things are not allowed. They are impermissible. But we also mentioned last week that there are exceptions to this rule. How are these exceptions found? They are found in the other narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the hadith of Hudhayfa that we took last week is a general rule. It is the basic principle. Gold and silver are not allowed. However, there are exceptions to this rule that are mentioned in many ahadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. From those exceptions is what we have here. From those exceptions is what we have in this hadith of Anas radiallahu anhu. And that is that if you have a container or a pot or a cup or anything like this and it breaks, meaning that there is a hole in it or a part of it cracks, in order to repair that part, can you use silver? This hadith speaks about silver. Can you use silver? Yes, you can. So it is not allowed for you to take a silver utensil. But if you have, for example, a metal utensil and then part of it breaks, or a wooden utensil and a portion of it cracks, can you mend it with silver? Yes. This is what the hadith is speaking about. And what the scholars say, that the wisdom behind this is that when you take something which is a pure silver or gold utensil or vessel, as we mentioned last week, it leads to arrogance. And it's something which is not for us in this life, but it's for us in the hereafter, inshaAllah, and so on. And the other issues that we mentioned from the wisdoms concerning this, that the scholars mentioned. However, in this instance, no longer are you taking the gold or silver for its beauty, or so that you can display arrogance, or so that you can show off. Now it's simply an issue of repairing something. Simply an issue of repairing something. So the intention, the intent, the purpose behind it has completely changed. And because it's completely changed, it is now allowed. And so there are other things like this as well, as the scholars have mentioned. So for example, it is allowed for a man, for example, to use a filling that is gold. Or for example, if there is a narration of one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ that a part of his nose was taken off, that he had a hole in his nose and he used silver to replace it. He put silver in its place. So these are exceptions to the rule. Generally, it's not allowed for us to use silver or gold, even jewelry, to purify and adorn ourselves. But if it is to repair something, if it is in place of something like a tooth or a part of the nose, as is mentioned in those narrations of the Prophet ﷺ, or is done for a vessel or a utensil or a cup or a container, then it is allowed for the purposes of repair, not for the purposes of purification. And that is basically what this hadith of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu speaks about. So the benefits of this hadith, number one, is that the general ruling of gold and silver, as we mentioned last week, is that it is haram. It is prohibited. Number two, it is permissible when mending something or repairing something. However, this permissibility must only be used in the context in which it is mentioned in the ahadith. So for example, if someone was to have a broken cup and they were to replace it with a portion of gold, would it be allowed? No. Why? Because the hadith doesn't mention gold, it only mentions silver. So when you have an exception to the exception can only be applied in the parameters given by the Prophet ﷺ. You can't just start making analogy for anything and everything. Okay, so it must be just what is mentioned in that hadith. So the hadith mentions silver, not gold. So silver can be used. Whereas for gold fillings for teeth, gold is mentioned. Gold is mentioned. So gold can be used for teeth. And so it is basically what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned as the parameters for this. Number 3, that this metal that is used, the gold or the silver, it is not done for beautification, but is done out of need, or is done for the sake of repairing it. Number 4, that it is allowed for women generally to use gold and silver. As we mentioned before, that for women it is allowed for them to use gold and silver, but for men, there are only certain types of silver and gold that can be allowed. Number 1 is silver rings. So men can wear silver rings but not gold rings. Number 2, in teeth, so for filling teeth. Number 3, in the nose, as is mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the companion lost a part of his nose and replaced it with silver. And number 4, on weapons, in order to use on weapons. And so it is reported that the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, some of them would have a silver lining on their swords and on their blades. And so this is mentioned in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So these are exceptions to the rule. Everything else is not allowed. So for men to use silver or gold in any other way for jewelry or for adornment is not allowed. And for utensils, as we mentioned last week, it's not allowed for men or for women to use gold and silver. And with that, inshallah, we have finished this chapter of utensils. And inshallah, next week we'll go on to the next chapter, which is the removal of impurity. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Are there any questions? The narration of the brothers asking concerning the second opinion in the issue of tanned skin, where we said that those scholars said that you can't use skin at all, whether tanned or not tanned, and they mentioned that narration of Abdullah ibn Uqaym. We said there is weak. The brother saying, can you give some more detail? The weakness is number 1, that it is mursal, meaning that there is no companion in the chain of narration. And because the tabi'i never met the Prophet ﷺ, there is a missing link. And a missing link in the chain of narration of hadith generally means that it is weak. It is a weakness in the hadith. Number 2, it is muttarib, meaning that it conflicts with other more authentic hadith. So there are many hadith in this chapter, like I said, 14 or 15 just on this issue. From them are those that are in Bukhari and Muslim, and from them are those that are not in Bukhari and Muslim. Like the hadith of Ibn Abbas, and the hadith of Maymuna, and the hadith of Salama that we mentioned, and other ahadith, all of them showing the permissibility of using it. And so that one hadith which is weaker conflicts with all of these more authentic hadith, and especially those that are mentioned in al-Bukhari and Muslim, which are the most authentic type of hadith. And so because of this, it is a weak hadith. However, as I said, it is still the opinion of some of the companions. Some of the companions, radiallahu anhum, they held this opinion. So if someone takes that opinion, it's not as if they've invented something in the religion. There are companions like Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar, Aisha. These were major senior companions, very well-known companions of the Prophet ﷺ that held this opinion. And Allah knows best. No. So the last hadith of Anas, does it mean that we have to repair the cup? No. It's not an obligation. But generally, as we saw, and even in the previous hadith, like the fly falling into water and so on, generally the Prophet ﷺ, or in Islam, we're not ordered to waste stuff or to be extravagant. And so if something can be mended, repaired, and especially some people may be poor, or maybe, for example, that utensil is worth a lot. Simply because it's cracked, it doesn't mean that you throw it away. So it is something which is allowed, but it doesn't mean that it's obligatory upon you to repair it in that way. Yeah. So this isn't to do with the purity or impurity of the vessel, it's to do with the issue of gold and silver. Yeah. So even if you were to borrow something from someone that was a non-Muslim, and they gave you, for example, a cup, and it's clean, there's nothing in there, it's clean, they probably washed it as well, but you still wash it as well, just to conform to this hadith of the Prophet. No, just wash it. It's no du'as or anything, just wash it. I mean, rinse it, like it doesn't even have to be like, you don't have to go through like major, yeah. Yeah. In the Quran. It's in Surah Baqarah, but I don't know the verse number. Yeah, same. Yeah. Knives and forks that are silver or gold, same. Same ruling. On that narration? But that narration doesn't affect anything that we mentioned. Yeah. So that narration in which there was a scorpion, the Prophet ﷺ said, don't use it because there was something harmful in there, not because of the actual skin itself. No, no. 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 Yeah. You want to know about the tanning of skin? Wikipedia. Google. Sorry? When skin is tanned. No, not coloring. It goes through a process where it's softened and where the moisture is taken out. Yeah, I mean exactly the science behind it, I don't know. So if you're asking about how it works and all that, I don't know. I don't know. Allahu A'lam. But if you go to Wikipedia, I'm sure there are probably plenty of articles on this stuff. Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned that you could use gold fillings and that's permissible because of the Hadith the Sahaba was given gold in his nose. Does that mean we like use silver fillings then? Or we just gold because only gold is mentioned?
As far as I know, it's only gold that's mentioned. I don't know. Okay, inshallah. If you don't wash the utensil, no, it doesn't become haram for you. It doesn't become haram for you. But it's better to follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. What do you mean? Gold and silver utensils? Yeah, you're not allowed to use them. That are silver? Pure silver? I mean, they're like normally steel or something. Some kind of metal. It's not normally silver. Sorry? Yeah, so if they're silver, then you can't use them. Give them away, whatever, yeah. Okay, inshallah. Sallallahu alayhi wa Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم